Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. So today we are going to continue on our last video about Slumach's lost gold mine or gold source in British Columbia. And so if you didn't watch part one, you need to watch part one, and I will try to have a link for that in the description of this video. And like I said, we're going to continue on. We talked about some other prospectors that had went to look for his gold and some that had been successful finding gold on this expedition, and there's more stories here. So we are going to pick up on the next prospector that was successful finding gold in this region. And this legendary prospector, he did go missing eventually. Like, he had been back in this area a few times, and on obviously his last expedition he went missing. And this gentleman's name is Robert Allen Volcanic Brown, and he went by Volcanic Brown. And he had found so much gold back in this area of Pitt Lake, I believe, and other areas that he made a lot of money for himself, and I believe he even had gold dentures made because he had found so much gold and had a lot of gold. So he had heard about Slumach's gold, and he went on a solo expedition to find it. And he was already a legendary prospector by 1920. So in the 1920s, he made multiple trips back into these mountains northwest of Pitt Lake. And in 1931, when he went out, and apparently he had been going enough that he probably had told some people his general area, but in 1931 he didn't return. And so a rescue party that apparently was privy to, at least someone in the party was privy to his location or approximate location. So they went looking for Volcanic Brown. And this rescue party, they found his camp near Stave Glacier, but they didn't find Brown. In Brown's tent was a big jar full of gold. So his tent appeared to be undisturbed, and he had a big jar of gold in there, and also up on the mountain, or the mountain pass overlooking his camp, they found a crucible used in mining, likely his. And anyhow, they never found Volcanic Brown. Just his tent with all his gear and everything in it appeared to be undisturbed, and up on the pass, I think it was Bell Pass, they found a crucible. And so they assume that that's his, and he may have been using it to crush ore and everything. And obviously he had gold in his tent and everything, so he obviously found gold, or found a source of gold, because it was said to be a large jar of gold or gold nuggets. So anyhow, but no one really knows what happened to Brown. But there was a gentleman named Michael Collier, and he led an expedition slash, I don't know if he did, I think he made a documentary also, and he tried to follow in Brown's footsteps while making a documentary, and he did this many years ago. This might have been in the 1970s or 80s. So he went to Stave Glacier, and he was in an area, I think he said, just north of the alleged camp of Volcanic Brown, near where the crucible was found. And he said there was a creek down below that appeared to have no outlet. And this was a detail that was in the Jackson letter. It was said that a copy of the Jackson letter was also found in Volcanic Brown's tent, or in his camp there in 1931. So Volcanic Brown obviously had the Jackson letter. He knew where to go. He went. He found gold. He was amassing gold, and we don't know exactly what happened to him. And then we have rescue party details about where the camp was, and various other details. So I think with those details, Michael Collier was able to try to trace Volcanic Brown's location, at least to where his tent was set up. Now, we don't know how much further beyond the tent might have been the gold location or whatever, but anyhow, Collier on his expedition, he never found any gold on his expedition. So I guess technically we don't know. I mean, it's possible Volcanic Brown may have had his tent set up, and maybe he was on his way back to civilization and still, was a few miles away from the gold source as he made his way back, and he disappeared at some point. So we don't really know where he went. But the 1931 rescue operation did state that around Volcanic Brown's camp, the rocks were very high in copper. And when the current 2022 team was in this area that they were pretty sure they were in the right location, they determined that this area was very high in copper. The rocks were very high in copper. And they had determined this by using a spectrometer that could test the rocks, current technology here. And they determined that a lot of the rocks here were high in copper, but they found another important thing too as they tested the rocks. They also found that they were high in arsenic. And obviously, arsenic is a toxic substance. If you ingest enough of it, it's a death sentence. And I think they said arsenic was about the second most prevalent mineral in these rocks. So it's a difficult situation, really. Ultimately, when you look at it, you think you're back in the wilderness in some of the purest area where people have hardly set foot. There's glaciers around you, glacial meltwater streams, and you feel like you should be able to drink from these streams. The water should be super pure and fresh, and obviously if these streams are running over rocks that are high in arsenic, they're picking up arsenic, and probably is very toxic water to drink. And the more you're back in these areas looking for the gold, and the more searching you do, the more expeditions you continue to come back in here year by year, you're probably ingesting more and more and more arsenic. And so it seems that a lot of people that left these areas with these mysterious illnesses, possibly it was arsenic poisoning, and when you ingest enough, there's no turning back. It is going to kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we know that Walter Jackson had a mysterious illness that caused him to write the Jackson letter on his deathbed, explaining where he found all this gold that he was finding and coming back with once he realized that he was too sick to ever go back. Another thing that was found while digging through the Royal British Columbia archives by this new team was that they found from 1897 or so, there was a company founded, and it was named the Slumach Mining Company. And this was just about 6 years after Slumach's death. So the founders of this company were the newspaper editor and his brother, who was Slumach's defense lawyer. So it seems that Slumach's lawyer would be someone that might have caught wind of the existence of a lost gold mine from Slumach, and some of the rumors kind of swirling around that. And Also, in the archives, they did find the original court transcripts from the 1891 trial, and they did find an actual statement from Slumach himself where he said that, quote, Louis B. was habitually quarreling with me, and he frequently harassed me with improper language and threatened me more than once with violence, and I was in constant fear of him, end quote. So when we look at that too, I think we can determine that this younger, much younger guy, Louis B., was probably harassing an old man, and anyhow, it didn't go well in the long run, since there was a witness that said what he said on on Louis B.'s side, that Charles Seymour, that was a witness in the trial. They took his word as fact, and the rest is history there, unfortunately. Another thing that is brought up too is this glacier field, that I believe one of the clues had something to do with the head of the glacier as a reference point. And this glacier field, I believe it was said, has retreated a mile or more through global warming or whatever. And, so we've lost a bit of this glacier field. It doesn't look like it used to look in the, late 1800s, when people were probably crossing it and using certain reference points and stuff like that too. So there's no telling if certain clues don't look the same or aren't as prevalent as they may have been over 100 years ago, or whatever the case happens to be. Now, as we mentioned, some of the most important clues have come from this Jackson letter. And this Jackson letter was written about 1901, and it was addressed to Dear Friend. Now, it doesn't tell us who Dear Friend is, but some people have done a bit of work and determined who they think this dear friend was, according to some of the details in the Jackson letter and everything. So, according to a 1915 newspaper article, Wilbur Armstrong of Washington State, he got a hold of the original Jackson letter. Now, Armstrong was a prospector who searched for the gold location for 10 years or so north of Pitt Lake. In 1915, at the age of 72, he was going to the area one last time, and he provided an interview for a newspaper. And Armstrong believed that the letter was actually written to a man named Andrew Hall, a friend of Jackson and a prospector of the Yukon. So this gentleman, Andrew Hall, he needed more money for his Yukon prospecting, as maybe apparently he thought it would be too difficult to find this location mentioned in the letter, so I believe he decided to sell the letter. And I think this was somewhere around 1904. So he was said to have sold the letter, and there was a chart or a map or something that came with the letter, and he sold it to Wilbur Armstrong's cousin, who Armstrong then acquired it from. So the transcript of the original letter was dated February 10th, 1904, and this does line up with the 10-year period before the 1915 interview, when Armstrong made his summertime trips back into the Pitt Lake area. So if the letter was written in 1904, and if it changed hands, a couple of times and landed in this gentleman's hand, Wilbur Armstrong, in 1905 or so, and he spent 10 years going to look for it, and gives this interview in 1915, and he happens to say he's been looking for it for 10 years and he hasn't found it. That all matches up. So there is a copy of the letter that's supposedly supposed to be the original, and it was copied by Fred Brox in December of 2008, and he copied it from a transcript letter of Dick Carter from around 1940, which was given to him or provided to him to copy from one of Dick Carter's probably grandkids. I don't know, Richard James Carter, a descendant of Dick Carter. So that is how we have come to be able to see the original letter or the supposed original letter. Now, there are a couple of spots with a few key details omitted and just left blank. I think that's why he was provided with the letter. He was most likely allowed to share the letter if he omitted a few key details. But this letter will give you the gist of exactly what the content of the letter is and what the gist of the situation is. So like I said, it is titled Dear Friend, and it also, the date, it says San Francisco, February 10th, 1904. And the letter reads as follows. It will come to you as a surprise after all these years to hear from me, for no doubt you have long since forgotten me. But you will remember the old man that you so kindly grub-staked with money and provisions at Gaitos. Since then, I have prospected with varied success, which usually goes with the life of a prospector. In 1901, I went to BC, and it is on this trip I want to tell, and hope you will gain by it untold thousands for your kindness to me. I heard you went broke like most everybody else at Gaitos, but had lost all trace of you since then, except that you had gone to Washington. Well, I made a great discovery in New Westminster, but after coming out for supplies and tools, was taken down with a severe attack of rheumatism that ever since has left me almost bedfast until a short time ago, when I recovered sufficiently as though to make the trip again. I made my mind up to hunt you up and take you with me. In hunting over a Seattle directory, I found your name and address and concluded to come to Seattle to talk the matter over with you. A few days after arriving here from my little place in the hills, I was suddenly stricken down again, and the doctors say that I will never recover and may drop off at any time, for my heart is badly affected. So I will tell you of my trip and what I found, and direct you to the best I can to find it. It is too great to be lost to the world, and I know with you it will be in good hands. Well, I arrived in Vancouver about the 1st of July and hired a couple of natives to take me to the headwaters of the blank. Then, dismissing the natives, I struck out in the mountains, and they are rough ones. I prospected up beyond the lake and found nothing of importance, but the formation looked all right. I concluded to prospect back towards Blank Lake. I kept well up on the mountains, but was often compelled to make long trips down before crossing could be found on the deep canyons. I had been out almost 2 months and found myself running short of grub. I lived mostly on fresh meat, for one can't carry much of a pack in those hills. Found a few very promising ledges and some color in the little creeks, but nothing that I cared to stay with. I had almost made up my mind to light out the next day. I climbed to the top of a sharp ridge, and I looked down into a little canyon or valley about 1.5 miles or 2 miles long. But what struck me as singular, it appeared to have no outlet for the little creek that flowed at the bottom, Afterwards, I found the creek entered a blank and is lost. After some difficulty, I found my way down to the creek. The water was almost white. The formation for the most had been slate and granite, but there I found a kind of schist and slate formation. Now comes the interesting part. I had only a small prospecting pan, but I found colors at once right on the surface, and such colors they were. I knew then I had struck it at last. I'm going upstream. I came to a place where the bedrock was bare, and there you can hardly believe me, but the bedrock was yellow with gold. In a few days I gathered thousands, and there were thousands more in sight. Some of the nuggets were as big as walnuts, and there were many chunks carrying quartz. After sizing up carefully, I saw that there were millions stowed away in the little cracks. On account of the weight, I buried part of the gold at the foot of a large tent-shaped rock facing the creek. You can't miss it. There is a mark cut out on it. Taking with me what I supposed to be about $10,000 proved to be over $8,000. After 3 days of extreme hard traveling, it would not be over 2 days of good going, but the way was rough and I was not feeling well. I arrived at the lake, and while resting there at the Indian camp, I was taken sick and have never since been able to return, and now I fear I never shall. I am alone in the world, no relations, no one to look to me for anything. Of course, I have never spoken of this find during all of the time for fear of it being discovered. It has caused me many anxious hours, but the place is so well guarded by surrounding ridges that it should not be found for many years unless someone knew its being there. Oh, how I wish I could go with you and show you this wonderful place, for I find I can't give any exact directions, and it may take you a year or more to find it, but don't give up. Keep at it. You will not fail, and you will be repaid beyond your wildest dreams. I believe any further direction only tend to confuse, so I will only suggest further that you go alone or take at least 1 or 2 Indians to pack food, and no one need to know but you're going on a hunting trip until you find the place and get everything fixed up to suit yourself. When you find it, and I am sure you will, should you care to see me, advertise in the Frisco Examiner, and if I am living, I will either come to see you or let you know where to find me. But once more I say to you, don't fail to look this great property up, and don't give up until you find it. I am very sorry I can't give you more definite instructions. Of course, I expected to have gone back long since. I have drawn a rough sketch that will help you. Success and happiness, yours truly, W. Jackson. Underneath that, he writes, from the head of Pitt Lake, and not more than 20 miles in a northwesterly direction to the hidden treasure. But there is no trail and nothing to guide you, except that when you get within a few miles of the place, you will see on a lower ridge 3 sharp peaks, each some 50 or 100 feet high. As you face these, the hidden treasure is below and to the right of these peaks. So that is the famous Jackson letter with all of his details. And that kind of finalizes the story of Slumach's lost gold. And if you have other thoughts about it, you can let us know in the comments. But it sounds like it is so extremely remote and so difficult to get to that it's very possible it is still out there. Or the landscape could have changed and some of the reference points may not look the same and it might be extremely difficult to get to, or you might have to stumble upon it by chance now. It's hard to say. So anyhow, you can let us know any thoughts you have in the comments. Thanks.